What happens when one of the most beloved talk show hosts in the world comes face to face with a guest who refuses to play by the rules? In just 32 seconds, a single comment would shatter the carefully crafted image of a royal and expose the kind of entitlement that leaves audiences stunned. This is the story of how Prince Harry went from celebrated guest to ejected troublemaker on the Graham Norton Show, and the shocking exchange that made it all happen. The stage was set for what should have been a delightful evening of entertainment. Graham Norton, the quick-witted Irish host known for his charm and ability to make even the most reserved celebrities open up, had assembled a star-studded lineup. The audience buzzed with excitement as they settled into their seats. Among the guests was Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, who had been making the rounds promoting his latest charitable endeavors. Graham had interviewed countless royals, celebrities, and public figures over the years, always managing to strike that perfect balance between respect and playful banter. The show opened with Graham's signature warmth. He bounded onto the stage, waving to the audience, his energy infectious as always. After his monologue, he introduced his guests one by one. When Prince Harry's name was called, the audience erupted in applause. Harry walked out, waving to the crowd, and took his seat on the famous red couch. Graham greeted him with his usual friendly demeanor. "Welcome, welcome. It's so lovely to have you here," Graham said, his smile genuine and welcoming. "Thanks for having me," Harry replied, settling into his seat with what appeared to be casual confidence. The conversation started pleasantly enough. Graham asked about Harry's recent projects, his charity work, and how he was adjusting to life. Harry answered the questions, but there was something in his tone, a subtle edge that those watching closely might have noticed. He seemed to deflect some of Graham's more lighthearted questions, responding with short, clipped answers that didn't quite match the jovial atmosphere of the show. Graham, ever the professional, tried to steer the conversation toward more engaging topics. He brought up a funny story he'd heard about one of Harry's recent public appearances, hoping to get a laugh from his guest. But Harry didn't laugh. Instead, "War." He shifted in his seat and gave Graham a look that could only be described as dismissive. "I'm not sure where you heard that story, Graham, but it's not exactly accurate," Harry said, his voice cool. Graham chuckled, trying to keep things light. "Well, you know how these things get passed around. It's all in good fun." "Is it, though?" Harry shot back, his tone sharpening. "Maybe people should check their facts before spreading stories about me." The audience fell silent. Graham's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered, his years of experience kicking in. He tried to smooth over the awkward moment with a self-deprecating joke. Fair enough. I'll be more careful with my royal gossip from now on," Graham said with a laugh, hoping to lighten the mood. But Harry wasn't done. "You know, Graham, this is exactly the problem with shows like this. You invite people on. You act like you're their friend. But really, you're just looking for a soundbite or a headline." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Graham's expression shifted from friendly host to someone who was clearly taken aback. He maintained his composure, but those who knew him well could see the flash of hurt in his eyes. "I can assure you, that's not what this show is about," Graham said, his voice still polite, but with a hint of firmness. "We're here to have a good time, to chat, to laugh. That's all." Harry leaned back on the couch, crossing his arms. "Right. Well, maybe you should tell your research team to do a better job then. Some of us actually care about accuracy." Graham took a breath, clearly trying to keep the show on track. "I appreciate your concern. Let's move on to something else, shall we? Tell me about your upcoming trip. I hear you're heading somewhere exciting." "Do we have to talk about that?" Harry interrupted, his tone bordering on rude now. "I mean, is there anything actually interesting you want to discuss? Or are we just going to stick to the standard celebrity small talk?" The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not the lighthearted banter they had come to expect from the Graham Norton Show. Graham, to his credit, remained calm, though his jaw tightened slightly. "Harry, I'm doing my best here," Graham said, his voice measured. "If there's something specific you'd like to talk about, I'm all ears." "Now that's why you're here, isn't it? To have a conversation." "A conversation implies two people engaging equally," Harry retorted. "What I'm experiencing right now feels more like an interrogation." Graham's patience was clearly being tested. He glanced at the audience, then back at Harry. "An interrogation? I've asked you about your charity work and your travel plans. I'm not sure how that qualifies as an interrogation." "You wouldn't understand," Harry said dismissively. "Now you've never had to deal with the kind of scrutiny I face every day." Graham paused, and for a moment, it looked like he might let the comment slide. But then something shifted in his expression. He had been gracious. He had been patient. But this was his show, his space, and he had a responsibility to his audience and his crew. "You're right. I haven't lived your life," Graham said, his voice steady. "But I have spent decades in this industry, interviewing people from all walks of life. And I treat every single one of them with respect. I've extended that same courtesy to you tonight, and frankly, I don't think I'm getting it in return." Harry's eyes narrowed. "Are you seriously lecturing me right now?" "I'm not lecturing anyone," Graham replied. "I'm simply saying that this is a two-way street. If you're not comfortable being here, if this isn't the platform you want, then perhaps we should reconsider how we proceed." The audience collectively held its breath, and this was unprecedented. Graham Norton was known for his ability to handle difficult guests with humor and grace, but even he had his limits. Harry stood up abruptly, his face flushed. "You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I shouldn't be here. I thought this would be different, but it's just like every other talk show. All surface, no substance." Graham rose to his feet as well, maintaining his composure. "I'm sorry you feel that way. This show has always been about celebrating people and creating a space for genuine conversation. If that's not what you're experiencing, then I apologize. But I won't apologize for the format or for trying to make this enjoyable for everyone." "Enjoyable for everyone?" Harry scoffed. "You mean enjoyable for you and your ratings." That was the moment everything changed. Graham's expression hardened. He had been patient, understanding, and professional throughout the entire exchange. But this accusation crossed a line. "All right, that's enough," Graham said firmly. "I've tried to make this work. I've been respectful, and I've given you every opportunity to engage in a meaningful way. But if you're going to sit here and insult me, insult my show, and insult the people who work incredibly hard to make this happen, then I think it's time for you to leave." The studio erupted. Some audience members gasped. Others whispered to each other in disbelief. This was not scripted. This was real. Harry stared at Graham, seemingly shocked that he was being called out so directly. "Excuse me? You're kicking me off your show?" "I'm asking you to leave, yes," Graham said, his voice calm but unyielding. "This isn't working, and I won't subject my audience or my team to any more of this hostility." For a moment, Harry looked like he might argue further, but something in Graham's steady gaze made him reconsider. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the couch and turned toward the audience. "This is what happens when you try to have an honest conversation," Harry said, addressing the crowd. "They shut you down." Graham shook his head. "No, this is what happens when you come onto a show and treat everyone around you with contempt. There's a difference between honesty and disrespect, and you've chosen the latter." With that, Harry stormed off the stage, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. The cameras followed him as he disappeared behind the curtain. Graham stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath, before turning back to the audience. "Well," Graham said, his characteristic humor slowly returning, "that was unexpected. I think we all need a moment to process what just happened. Let's take a quick break, shall we?" The audience applauded, not the polite, obligatory applause that typically follows such announcements, but a genuine show of support for Graham. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a host who had stood his ground in the face of unreasonable behavior, and they respected him for it. During the commercial break, the studio buzzed with conversation. Audience members turned to each other, recounting what they had just seen, still processing the shock of it all. The crew scrambled to adjust the show's lineup, reaching out to the other guests to reassure them and prepare for the second half of the broadcast. When the show returned, Graham addressed the situation head-on. He didn't try to pretend it hadn't happened or brush it under the rug. Instead, he spoke directly to the camera, his honesty refreshing. "So, as you all just witnessed, we had a bit of an unexpected turn of events," Graham began, his tone measured. "I want to be clear about something. This show has always been a place where guests can share their stories, their humor, and their humanity. But it's also a place built on mutual respect. Tonight, and that respect wasn't reciprocated, and I had to make a difficult decision." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "I don't take that lightly. I've had thousands of guests on this show over the years, and the vast majority of them have been wonderful. But every now and then, you encounter someone who, for whatever reason, isn't in the right headspace to be here. And when that happens, the best thing to do is to acknowledge it and move forward." The audience applauded again, and this time even louder. Graham smiled, clearly touched by their support. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Now, let's get back to what we do best, shall we? Having a good time." The rest of the show proceeded without incident. Graham's other guests were charming and engaging, clearly eager to dispel the tension from earlier. They shared funny anecdotes, promoted their projects, and participated in the show's signature games with enthusiasm. By the end of the broadcast, the earlier drama felt almost surreal, like a bizarre interruption in an otherwise perfectly delightful evening. But even as the show wrapped up and the audience filed out of the studio, the confrontation between Graham and Harry remained the topic on everyone's lips. What had started as a routine interview had devolved into a masterclass in how not to behave as a guest. Harry's entitled attitude, his dismissive comments, and his refusal to engage in good faith had painted him as the clear antagonist in the situation. Graham, on the other hand, had emerged as the hero of the night. He had been patient, professional, and respectful, even in the face of hostility. When pushed to his limit, he had stood his ground, defending not just himself, but his team and his audience. It was a reminder that kindness and professionalism should never be mistaken for weakness. The people who worked on the show, the producers, the camera operators, the makeup artists, all rallied around Graham after the taping. They had seen firsthand the grace with which he had handled an impossible situation, and they were proud to work with someone who valued respect and dignity above all else. As for the audience members who had been lucky, or perhaps unlucky, enough to witness the drama unfold live, they left the studio with a story they would tell for years to come. They had seen behind the curtain, so to speak, and what they had seen was a host who truly cared about his craft and the people he worked with. The exchange itself, when replayed and analyzed, revealed so much about the characters of the two men involved. Harry had walked onto that stage with an air of superiority, as if the rules that applied to everyone else didn't apply to him. His comments about accuracy and scrutiny, while perhaps rooted in genuine frustration with his public life, it came across as petty and self-absorbed when directed at a host who was simply trying to do his job. Graham's responses, in contrast, were measured and thoughtful. He didn't rise to the bait, didn't engage in a shouting match, and didn't resort to personal attacks. Instead, he calmly articulated his perspective, defended his show and his team, and ultimately made the difficult but necessary decision to ask Harry to leave. It was leadership in action. One of the most telling moments came when Harry accused Graham of only caring about ratings. It was a low blow, the kind of accusation designed to undermine someone's integrity. But Graham didn't flinch. He stood by his principles and made it clear that the show was about more than just numbers. It was about creating a space where people could be themselves, share their stories, and connect with an audience. That mission was more important than any individual guest, no matter how famous. The moment when Graham finally said, "All right, that's enough," was a turning point. It was the moment when patience gave way to resolve, when diplomacy gave way to decisiveness. And it was the right call. By asking Harry to leave, Graham sent a clear message that respect is non-negotiable, and that no guest, regardless of their status, is entitled to treat others poorly. Harry's parting words, his attempt to frame himself as the victim, fell flat. The audience wasn't buying it. That they had seen the entire exchange, and they knew exactly who had been unreasonable. His claim that he was being shut down for trying to have an honest conversation was contradicted by his own behavior. Honest conversations require good faith engagement, something Harry had been unwilling or unable to provide. As Harry left the stage, the camera lingered on Graham for a moment. The host's face showed a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the confrontation was over. Sadness that it had to happen at all. But there was also determination in his eyes, a resolve to move forward and continue doing what he loved. The incident became a defining moment for the Graham Norton Show. It showcased the values that the show stood for: respect, humor, and genuine connection, and it demonstrated that those values would be protected, even if it meant making tough decisions. Graham's handling of the situation earned him even more admiration from fans and colleagues alike. What could have been a disaster for the show instead became a testament to Graham's character. He had faced a difficult situation with grace and integrity, and he had come out the other side with his reputation not only intact, but enhanced. It was a reminder that sometimes the best thing you can do is stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. The 32 seconds that changed everything had come during Harry's comment about the show being all surface and no substance. It was in that moment that Graham realized the conversation wasn't going to improve, that Harry wasn't interested in meeting him halfway. And it was in that moment that Graham made the choice to prioritize the integrity of his show over the presence of a high-profile guest. Looking back at the entire exchange, it's clear that this wasn't a case of two people simply having different perspectives. This was a case of one person behaving poorly and another person refusing to tolerate it. Harry's sense of entitlement was on full display, from his dismissive attitude toward Graham's questions to his accusatory comments about the show's motives. He seemed to believe that his status exempted him from basic courtesy, and he was wrong. Graham, meanwhile, exemplified what it means to be a true professional. He was welcoming at the start, patient in the middle, and firm when necessary. He gave Harry multiple opportunities to course correct, to engage in a more positive way. And when those opportunities were squandered, he took action. It was a masterclass in leadership and integrity. The audience's reaction throughout the exchange was telling. They started out excited to see Harry, applauded him when he came out, and were eager to hear what he had to say. But as his behavior worsened, the applause stopped. The laughter died away. And by the time he left the stage, the only person receiving support was Graham. The audience knew who deserved their respect. And it wasn't the entitled guest who had insulted their beloved host. One of the most powerful aspects of the entire situation was Graham's refusal to engage in a blame game. When he addressed the audience after the break, he didn't trash Harry or try to humiliate him further. He simply stated the facts, acknowledged that the situation hadn't worked out, and moved on. It was classy, dignified, and exactly what you would expect from someone of Graham's caliber. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been starker. Harry left the stage in a huff, throwing accusations and playing the victim. Graham remained calm, composed, and focused on doing right by his audience and his team. It was a lesson in how to handle conflict and how not to. As the show continued without Harry, the atmosphere in the studio shifted. The tension melted away, replaced by the warmth and humor that the Graham Norton Show was known for. The other guests were wonderful. The audience was engaged, and Graham was back to being the charismatic host everyone loved. It was as if Harry's departure had lifted a dark cloud, allowing the show to shine once again. In many ways, the incident became a defining moment, not just for the show, but for Graham himself. It proved that his kindness and humor were not signs of weakness, but strengths that coexisted with a backbone of steel. When pushed, he could stand up for himself and for the people he cared about. And that's what made him such a beloved figure in the entertainment world. The story of what happened that night serves as a reminder that respect is a two-way street. Guests on talk shows are there because they've been invited, because the host and the production team believe they have something interesting to share. But that invitation comes with an expectation of mutual respect. When that respect is absent, as it was with Harry, the entire dynamic falls apart. Graham's decision to ask Harry to leave was not made lightly. It was clear from his body language and his words that he had hoped things would improve, that Harry would recognize the tone of the conversation and adjust accordingly. But when it became obvious that wasn't going to happen, Graham did what he had to do. He protected his show, his team, and his audience from further negativity. The exchange also highlighted the importance of self-awareness. Harry seemed completely oblivious to how his behavior was being received. He appeared to genuinely believe that he was the one being wronged, that Graham's questions were intrusive or inappropriate. But to everyone watching, it was clear that the problem was not the questions, but Harry's response to them. Self-awareness, or the lack thereof, can make all the difference in how situations unfold. Graham's handling of the situation demonstrated a key principle, that you can be kind and firm at the same time. He didn't yell. He didn't insult. He didn't lose his cool. He simply drew a line and enforced it. That's the mark of someone who knows their worth and refuses to compromise their values, even under pressure. As the show came to a close, Graham thanked his remaining guests and his audience for sticking with him through an unusual night. His gratitude was genuine, and the audience could feel it. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment of real human drama, and they had seen firsthand the character of the man who had hosted them. The incident would go down in the history of the Graham Norton Show as one of its most memorable moments, not because of who was involved, but because of what it revealed about the values that the show held dear. It was a night when entertainment took a back seat to integrity, and when a host chose to do the right thing, even when it was hard. In the end, the story of Prince Harry being kicked off the Graham Norton Show was not just about a heated exchange or a dramatic exit. It was about respect, professionalism, and the courage to stand up for what's right. Graham Norton had faced a difficult situation and had handled it with grace and strength. Harry had revealed himself to be someone who, despite his privilege and platform, still had much to learn about basic decency and respect. And that night, as the audience left the studio and Graham prepared for the next show, one thing was abundantly clear. The Graham Norton Show would continue to be a place of warmth, humor, and genuine connection. Because at its heart, it was led by someone who understood what truly mattered most of all. Someone who knew that treating people with dignity and respect was not negotiable under any circumstances whatsoever, and that this principle remained completely unshakable and firm always throughout every single moment.